Carol, thank you very much for joining us. We will be starting the webinar in a couple of minutes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Cargo Claims and Loss Prevention Conference, or webinar, rather. My name is Christian Piaget, and I'm the regular organizer of this Iata Cargo Claims and Loss Prevention event, also known as the CCLP, that is usually taking place every year and has been going on for the last 16 years. Over the past year and a half, webinars have been a trend, and the CCLP is no exception to that. We already had a webinar last year on cargo claims, and of course, we look forward to resuming physical events for the networking opportunities it can provide, also for the interaction that we usually see in these events. But until we can do physical events, we thought it would be useful to organize a new webinar, at least this year, this time focused on a specific subject. Indeed, we cannot ignore that the air cargo world has evolved significantly over the past months. It has taken a sudden preeminence on the international transport stage, and at the same time, this increased interest in air cargo has led to faster developments that we have ever seen before in this sector. Among these developments, digitalization is a topic that is regularly mentioned. So we thought it would be interesting to look at the impact of digitalization on the management of cargo claims, and also how we can leverage digitalization to improve loss prevention. Can we have the agenda slide, please? So in the next 2 hours, we have an impressive lineup of speakers willing to share their views on this topic of digitalization. We'll start with a keynote speech from an airline CEO, Tim Strauch from Amerijet. Then we will look at the latest developments in digitalization for air cargo, benefiting from the experience of Henk Mulder from Iata and Claire Alam from Cathay Pacific on this topic. After that, we will enter into the core of the subject, looking at how these developments are relevant for claims managers. Tom Soharal and Sebastian Cosgrove from Air Canada and Kelly Shove from American Airlines will give us their take on this topic. And finally, we will hear from a panel of legal experts on the same subject. This session will be moderated by Dan Soffin, who will organize a discussion with Lucy England from Fox Williams in the UK, Bart Banino from Collins Forsyth in the US, and George Leludas, Associate Professor at Swansea University in the UK. We will conclude this event with a presentation providing a claims manager's guide to the way forward in the digital world, so we can encourage you to stay till the end. This webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording and the slides with the registered participants at the end of after the end of this event. There are two more things I would like to mention before we go further. Can we have the next slide, please? We have a lot to cover within the next 2 hours. This means that we will not be able to provide the same interactivity that we usually provide at our physical events. However, if time permits, I may be able to take 1 or 2 questions at the end of the claims manager panel and the legal panel. So you can submit your questions in the question box anytime during the event. This is moderated by my colleagues in the background. Also, if you have other questions about the webinar, they can answer in the chat box. If we have time, we'll pick up probably 1, maybe 2 questions among the best questions to submit them to the panelists. I apologize in advance that we will certainly not be able to address all your questions, but this webinar is the launch of a discussion that will remain relevant in the coming months as well. So hopefully we can continue this discussion at our next CCLP events, maybe in 2022. Next slide, please. There is a last point I want to raise. We must remain careful not to breach any competition rule, like for all Iata events. So we will not address topics that are sensitive from a competition perspective, such as individual policies or commercial decisions. There are plenty of lawyers on this webinar, including Iata lawyers, so I'm confident that we will remain on track, but it does not hurt to remind that we must keep these rules in mind. So please have a read on this slide, and let's keep to these rules. With this, I would like now to give the floor to Tim Strauss. I will not go through his impressive biography because you can find the details of all our speakers on the event's website. Let me just summarize by stating that Tim is a recognized leader in the industry who held leadership roles in global sales and operations in several airlines before becoming chief executive officer at Amerijet in August of last year. By the way, I want to thank Tim and Amerijet for having made this event possible by sponsoring it, and I look forward to having his take on this important topic of digitalization in air cargo. Tim, the floor, if I can say that for a virtual event, is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Christian. Glad to be with everybody today. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. This is a subject near and dear to my heart. Been in the industry for over 35 years, and almost every position I've had responsibility for claims and loss prevention, among other areas. And I'd say it's among the toughest jobs in the industry, just because it's in a focal point that gets a lot of pressure from both the industry side and from the airline operation side itself. There are probably as many different approaches to claims as there are companies, and we'll talk about a few of those as we go. Just a little bit about the company I work with today, Amerijet. I came here from Air Canada, where I was head of cargo for a brief period of time, too brief, set a little bit shorter than I expected by COVID. This company's been in business for 47 years. We've tripled the size of the fleet in the last, well, we'll do it over a 2-year period, but the last 15 months, we've gone from 8 aircraft to flying 20, and we'll go up, continue to go up from there to about 25. We're a Miami-based operation, serving predominantly the Caribbean markets and the Latin America markets, but also into Europe on a scheduled basis, which means freight forwarders and direct customers. But we also fly for almost all of the large global integrators out there in an ACMI world, and we can talk more about that if you choose at another time. But we do fly the world, and we're glad to be able to do that. When we look at where the industry is right now and where we see things going, looking at 3 different studies, one by a component and engine manufacturer, one by a global logistics and consulting firm, and one by a large air cargo company. We look to 2030 that the industry will continue to grow at about twice the growth of demand versus capacity, so 2-to-1 ratio of demand versus capacity, which will continue to offer a lot of new opportunities. One of the reasons we continue to purchase or lease aircraft into our system. E-commerce is obviously the big driver of that, moving some huge amounts going forward, growing at a compound annual growth rate of about 4%, and we see that continuing through 2030. One of the studies actually shows it going out to 2038. So we're pretty bullish on where the industry is and what we think will continue to happen. We know there are 1,100 wide-body passenger aircraft that are not returning into the industry. That creates some more capacity demand than we have seen in the past. And as I think most of us know in the e-commerce world, it's lighter, it's fluffier. It takes about 50% more capacity in cubic capacity moved in what we would have normally looked at as general cargo. So as we look at those things, that's beginning to drive how we approach the business, and I'm assuming the same for many here. A couple of underlying assumptions on how we do business, our approach to business. We're in the transportation and information industry. Those are our 2 products. And for most of our customers, the transportation side is equaled, if not exceeded, by the demand for information. So we are all at this point, whether we think about it this way or not, working for IT companies. We are an IT company, and how we digitize will make the difference of how we differentiate ourselves or not from the rest of the industry. I think those who are not choosing to digitize or unable to digitize are going to have a hard time competing as we continue to move forward. That includes in the claims and loss prevention side, which is so dependent on good information. We also would say that the bar is being set not by necessarily the other passenger or all cargo, general cargo companies, but really by the e-commerce giants, the FedExes, UPSs, Amazons, Alibaba. That's where the bar is being set, and that's what our customers, both on the commercial side and the retail side, are expecting us to continue to grow into as best we can going forward. Strategically, everything we do, and I think the industry needs to be doing, has to take these into account, including in the claims area. I'm going to spend a little bit of the balance of our time together to tell a few brief stories about from the customer perspective. I looked through the agenda and I thought it was really from the industry perspective, and I want to kind of represent a little bit more of the customer perspective, the commercial side and the relationship side. Everything that has to do with the industry and how the customers view us, how we work together, how we resolve problems, the speed at which we do is essential to us being able to present a global product that is at the level that we need it to be at. So a few stories. I worked in Honolulu for 5 years for Hawaiian Airlines, great airline, great place to work, obviously. And while there, I ordered through Amazon some golf equipment, which is also natural to Hawaii, and received notice that the goods were delivered to my home. And I lived in a kind of a remote area, a little bit up a mountain. And when I got home that evening, the goods simply weren't there. I checked a couple of neighbors, which again, kind of a walking area that's not conducive to that readily. Nothing, no boxes at their locations either. Called to Amazon and just said, hey, the parcel's not here. They said, no problem. Next day, they had a shipment replacement to me the next day of the same product. I don't advocate for us to, for the lawyers and accountants in the room who are listening in to move at that pace or in that manner, I should say, as Amazon with the replacement at that level. But I do think there's something to the issue of speed and ease of response and the frictionless association with the customer that occurred there that the industry does need to go to, because that is the bar that's being set. So how do we move to that frictionless, fast environment? It has to be through the IT, the digitization, video, systems tracking, photos, immediately on hand and available to the claims representatives so we can resolve these issues quickly. It does have to be frictionless, and I think most of us know that the history in our side of the industry is to move very, very slow. It's also oftentimes we want to see what the rest of the industry that looks like us does and what pace they move at. And I think if any company that does that is going to be left behind, unfortunately, because the industry is moving that quickly. The technology is moving at a pace and at a capability that wants to be much faster than what we've seen ever in our past, and is going to continue to have those demands. So a couple of stories where I can name the company, I will. Where I can't, I won't. The next one I can. I worked for Northwest Airlines when we were operating 18 747 freighters into the Pacific. I was in charge of both the commercial side at one juncture and the operation side throughout my time with the company. And I remember when I first started, I'd come from the all cargo world, company called Emery Worldwide, if those of you who've been around for a while might know. And one of the first questions I asked when I got there was, how do we treat claims? What's our process? And the answer I got back was, we have a very simple response to claims requests, and that is we simply say no. That was their response, 100% no. Now, did they pay claims? Sure they did. But they started from a position to prove it to us that we had this claim and it was really our fault. As we all know, there's multiple entities that interact with us. Sometimes it's interline partners, sometimes it's trucking partners, intermodal transportation. All of those were partners, and could have, damages, et cetera, loss could have happened anywhere along the line. But that was the company's perspective on how they were going to move forward. Very interesting. I thought it was a little crazy, But if they could back it up, it wasn't the worst approach. And with great data, I think you can do that. Don't recommend it, however. Generally speaking, it will go the other direction, of course, and much more facilitative with the customer. The next company I won't name, but I was in charge of global operations at this company. When I first got there, on all these events I'm going to tell you, all happened in the first 45 days I was with the company. Literally my first day on the job, late morning, the first day on the job, I got a call from corporate communications, and they said, if you get a call from CNN, the news company CNN, if you get a call from CNN, don't take the call. That was all they said. So brand new, first day on the job, I kind of knew where my desk was and knew enough to answer the phone, but not a lot more. So obviously I went back and researched it. And what had happened was, unfortunately, and this is really a bad, terrible event, a customer had purchased a puppy, and the puppy was moving from the central part of the United States to the east coast of the northeast coast of the United States. And in the process of moving through the hub city, it was raining out. Somebody ran the dog out in the kennel, out to the belt loader. Nobody was around. They looked, they couldn't see the agent who was working on the ramp at that point. Put the dog down behind the belt loader. As the belt extended, it covered the area so the dog wouldn't get wet. Unfortunately, the employee who was driving the belt loader came out of the belly, down the belt loader, got onto the belt loader and backed up the vehicle, and the dog died. And the company didn't address it immediately, didn't come to the way the customer thought they should. The customer then called CNN to get some action, and we're getting a lot of traction. And even though I was told not to call CNN, I did call the customer. Very nice woman. And what she wanted was resolution to her problem, and to know that the company I was working for at that time was taking it seriously. And the company I was working for was among the largest airlines in the world. And by the time I had spoken to her, they had already put out memos, training, et cetera, to some 30,000 ramp and agent employees about how to handle live animals. And that was one of those where we just didn't address it quickly. And as most of us know, bad news does not age well. So that was day one on the job. Within the second week, I got a call from a gentleman, lived in Tampa, a dentist, and somehow or another he had a connection into Anchorage, Alaska, and seasonally he would move salmon from Alaska down into Tampa, and he distributed. So he had his dentist business, and he also distributed. And he said, hey, I got a call from your customer service personnel today, letting me know that we lost the shipment, or they lost the shipment. And so I apologized. I said, no, it's 6:30 at night at this point. And he said, I'm actually on my deck grilling the salmon that you all delivered to my company. So we delivered the goods, had all done everything right, that we delivered it on time, but had no data to back it up, and assumed that we had made an error. So that was number two. Number three, and this is one of those ones you just hate to have, got a call from JFK from a customer, a fellow who's a Greek heritage, but living in the US. His father had died, and they wanted to bury his father back in Athens. And so he said, we purchased this beautiful casket, and shipped it through your company to Athens, and got there great shape. And I'm thinking, people don't call you to tell you this kind of thing. And his response, or his next statement was, it was great that you got the casket there, but unfortunately it didn't ship my father's body. And extreme condolences, of course, and then extreme apologies for the level of service performed. And a very nice, gracious gentleman, but obviously, dutifully and justifiably upset. And the third one I want to say is, at that point, we were a few years into the TSA regime, and Ed Kelly was the head of the TSA for cargo, good friend from a prior job at Emory. And Ed called me and said, Tim, or I called Ed just to see how my company was doing in the TSA world. And his response to me was, just screen something. I said, Ed, what do you mean? He goes, please screen something. So we had a cultural problem, but a lot of it was laid off on claims, and the poor people in claims had no ability to fix the culture of the company. So we had to go deeply and fix the culture. And I do feel that that's often an issue in companies where the support systems aren't there. largely because of digitization and lack of digitization for these organizations. So claims can't fix culture. The culture has to be fixed. So I'm going to finish just with a couple of basic statements. These are areas of customer relationship that have to be central to any company. Accurate and timely information with frictionless interactions. Speed of response. How fast can you respond in this environment? Accurate invoicing. It drives customers crazy that you do all the rest of the work and then you invoice them incorrectly, and it creates a bad atmosphere. Poor service in general, and then claims, losses, and damages along the way. Those are all central issues for any company. Every company has to deal with these. How high those rank on your list is up to your own organization. But I think damage and losses are one of those that you have to take a look at, much like you do loss prevention on injuries. What are the root causes? How do you do a backwards analysis and predictive approach to removing any and all claims you possibly can? It's the industry to a degree. We are going to see things that happen, but how do you engineer out as many as the error points as you can? And a lot of that has to do, again, with cameras, digitization, immediate information, speed of response capability from the agent who runs your claims and loss prevention area, and ultimately growing that customer relation piece. And that's what it's all about. With that, I'll turn it back over to Christian. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to spend a few minutes talking about an important area in the industry. Back to you, Christian.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for this enlightening perspective. There are always some horror stories when we talk about claims, but it shows also the importance of the relationship with customers, and indeed speed and frictionless interaction are indeed key for that. So I think that sets the scene very well for this webinar. And again, thank you to you, Tim, and to Amerijet for providing the keynote for this event. So we will now see what's happening in the air cargo industry by looking at the increasingly rapid application and integration of digital technology in the air cargo supply chain. And for this, we are lucky to have two real experts on this topic, Hank Mulder and Clara Lam. Hank is the head of digital cargo at Iata. In this role, he's leading the digital transformation program and the development of digital standards for the global air cargo industry. And as he will show us, he's steering this industry towards an ambitious modernization program, working with multiple stakeholders, including beyond the air sector, to implement new digitalization standards. And Clara Lam will provide the airline perspective. She's head of cargo digital at Cathay Pacific Cargo, where she's also leading the digital transformation in this airline. This overview of what's happening in the industry in terms of digitalization will be very helpful before we dig deeper into the matter of claims and loss prevention. So Dan, Clara, we look forward to learning from you where the air cargo industry stands with digitalization. And I'll let you turn on your camera and introduce the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this. Happy also to be here with Clara. We're very much, I think, on a very similar page when it comes to digitalization, and we're going to just have a chat together about a number of topics. Yeah. I think the introduction that we had today was really excellent. Indeed, we see digitalization, or digitization, some people refer to. Digitalization we see increasingly in the various parts of our business. And so perhaps as a short introduction, that was my cat. As a short introduction, what have we done and what we have been working on in the last few years? In fact, the aviation industry has been very, very active in this particular area really for decades, really since the last century. A lot of programs had already been implemented to try and improve the exchange of information between airlines. And the programs we have focused on in particular had to do with the exchange of data related to shipments, to freight, to the actual journey, in particular the communication between the forwarders and the airlines. And so in the early 2000s, we implemented an e-freight program, which has been largely successful in a sense that something like close to 80% of all the shipments now use electronic airway bills which is one of the main documents that we wanted to exchange. It's not 100% yet, but it's pretty close. And there's lots of other documents that are also exchanged. Now, arguably, one might say, well, if we have that information, surely that's enough. And unfortunately, the industry around IT and digitalization has actually changed a lot since the last couple of decades. In fact, you only have to see how we are here in this webinar, how we exchange, how we use our mobile phones on a daily basis. None of that existed in the year 2000, right? So things move very, very fast, and therefore we need to keep up as well. And so one of the areas that we have been focusing on in the last few years is around what we refer to as data sharing. Essentially, rather than waiting for information to be pushed to us, we can actually go and get it ourselves. In the same way you can go to the website and get information, you can just pick it up and have the information that you need. And so in other words, a different approach to getting access to information is to help yourself rather than wait for it to be sent to you, which is a relatively powerless situation to be in. Another area where we're very active is around something we refer to as interactive cargo. This is about putting trackers with freight that allow us to understand what is the status of the freight at any time, whether it's location or temperature or pressure, or whether it's been tampered with, all of these things. Increasingly, we see that this is a requirement. 10 years ago, that was an amazing innovation around IoT. Now it's becoming a standard thing. And so a lot of stuff going on, a lot of active support also from the airlines. And so I'd like to perhaps go to Clara and tell us a little bit about digitalization at Cathay Pacific, an airline, not a trade association. What's happening there, Clara?
Yeah, sure, Hank. It's good that you mentioned the e-airway bill. And actually, Cathay is the first one to implement 100% e-airway bill in Hong Kong about 10 years ago. And don't you believe it? We are still working on it today. And the last couple of percents for global implementation is really difficult. But since it's so important, we will keep working on it and we will definitely make it. And apart from that, what we are now doing is we are going through an accelerated digital transformation. We are looking at the end-to-end customer journey and see where digitalization can fit in to add value to certain processes and to enhance customer experience. However, when we talk about the end-to-end, that's going to be huge. So to make it easier, we broke it down into 3 phases. They are the pre-journey, in-journey, and post-journey. For the pre-journey, it's mainly around modernizing cargo distribution through digital means so that customer can do business with us easily. We enhance our distribution channel so that our customer can easily get access to our flight schedule, availability, and they can make booking with us and get the confirmation quickly. And for the in-journey part, that's mainly around cargo handling when the shipment is within Cathay's custody. There are so many processes involved, and a lot of efforts have been put in there for risk management and prevention of claims and loss, and that's where our new service outer track kicks in. Riding on the Iata One Record and interactive cargo standard, we make use of the IoT and Bluetooth technology to provide full visibility of the shipment to our customers. It also enables us to conduct real-time monitoring of the shipment and take action quickly when things happen. Yeah. Apart from that, we also make use of live chat so that customers can reach out to the right person in our operation control center in no time. With such application of new technology, we also have new data and we have more data. And it's very important for continuous improvement because by making use of the data, we can precisely identify the areas for improvement and we can take action to address them quickly. Yeah. Oh, and what we have recently achieved, we have our Iata One Record API up and running, and we are now making use of it to exchange IoT data and shipment track and trace data with our customers. So that's a brief summary of what Cathay is now doing. So Hank, can you share with us what other carriers are doing?
Well, yes, I can, and there are not many that are as advanced as Cathay is. You really are always right at the edge of it, and I congratulate you in doing so. The other airlines, of course, are also very active in all of these areas. And in fact, we have a very active pilot program around the One Record data sharing program, where we have something like 100 companies that are actually actively using these new digital technologies to cooperate together. And what's interesting is that it's no longer just about getting airway bills from one party to the next. It's actually all sorts of different use cases. And you mentioned tracking of freight. But there's other things, for example, around how to manage the truck movements around an airport, or how to specifically manage things like pharma transport. There's lots of ULD management. There's lots of different areas. And what's interesting about digitalization today versus what it was maybe 10 years ago is that focus on the practical use and applications within our business, which is why I think it's appropriate that we're here at a cargo claims and loss prevention seminar, because we also need to be active in that area. One other area I want to mention quickly is it's not just airlines. We're also very active on the multimodal side, multimodal transport, because what we have seen is that the problems that we have in air transport, they're exactly the same in other modes of transport. Not always exactly the same, of course, running an ocean carrier is not the same as running an air carrier, but there's a lot of similarity when it comes to digitalization. And so there's a lot of cooperation between the various modes of transport, because the problem is too big for anyone just to deal with it on their own. And so there's cooperation. We are working on very futuristic programs for how we can exchange data so that you have the full end-to-end visibility, not just from airport to airport, but really from shipper to consignee. And so that brings me to a question for you, Clara, or perhaps a discussion we can have together is, what do we think digitalization can do to help with claims and loss prevention?
Hank, actually, your question brings us to the post journey. Yeah. After we deliver the shipment to our customers, of course, we have to do the cash billing and collect the money. However, when things happen, it's very important for the carriers to be responsive and to do our best to support our customers. And claims manager, actually, they're playing a very crucial role in this part. I think it might be a bit too much to ask for if we want the claims managers to keep our customers happy all the time, especially during the event of claims. However, I think at least we have to make the claims process as less painful as possible, and to represent the carriers to show our care and professionalism to the customers. And with such important roles, I think the claims manager definitely deserve very good digital tools to help them to carry out their duties. And I would like to make some suggestions here, like very good digital channel to allow the customer to submit their claims and required document through digital means and in a convenient way. And they need system to support the process, to shorten the overall turnaround time of the claims processing, to keep track of the progress, and to provide visibility of the status to both the customers and to the claims manager. And I would like to emphasize the important roles of the claims manager do not stop there when the claims settle. Actually, it's very important for the claims manager to make use of their valuable expertise to draw insights from the data and to identify the areas for improvement and the areas of risk, and make recommendations and feed them back to the operation department to enhance the overall handling capability and also the capability of claims and loss prevention. And I think claims managers definitely in the excellent position to do it.
So that's actually a very full picture that you have just painted there. And I'm just trying to process that. I put myself in the position of a claims manager. And I imagine that what you're talking about here really is that the claims manager will have all the tools available to them that allows them to support the processing and the submission of claims, the process support that you mentioned as well. And I imagine that this is really changing the whole the conception of this particular role to something where it isn't about managing the process. It's actually about getting the insights from the data that we collect through this process, which allows us then to do the improvements that are necessary. And sort of, I can't help, I mean, my apologies to everyone, I'm a bit of a geek and an IT guy, but when I hear that, I immediately think about using some of the modern analytics that exist as well, around perhaps using artificial intelligence to help us also analyze the data that is coming in that we're processing, that might help us also make recommendations on where are the weak points in the process. If anything, one of my takeaways from Tim's introduction earlier on is that it's an end-to-end problem. It touches everything. It isn't just the physical movement of goods. It's the people. It's the experience. It's taking care of these things. And so, if indeed we could provide the claims manager with all the additional data and tools, I think that job could shift from dealing with the process to actually really dealing with the challenge and as a result also the impact that it has on the overall perspective of the airline.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, with such tool is very important, and to make use of data definitely is I would not say it's future trend. It's already the trend, and the predictive capability is also very important, because the data not only tells us what happened in the past, but it also helps us to predict what will be happen in the future. Yeah, so yes, what Tim mentioned about the predictive capability would definitely be very important. And AI and machine learning, yeah, saying for cargo, I'm not saying that we're very advanced, but definitely, yeah, people will chase after that.
I think so too, and that brings me to a very practical question. I mean, it's nice to philosophize about what could happen and what we could do, but how will we actually make this happen? Do you have any suggestions about the approach an airline could take in benefiting from these technologies?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would suggest the claims managers to look at their current processes, to identify the pain points and see how they can be addressed. And based on that, they come up with their own digital requirements and work with their own IT and digital teams to see whether solution can be built in-house, or if they want to look out and see what solutions are available in the market. And I can assure you that many solutions out there. And then one more thing that's very important that the claims manager have to do is to come up with a very solid and strong business case and to push it forward within their own organization. Because if they don't push, nothing will happen at the end. Yeah, so that's my recommendation. But Hank, is there anything that Iata can do to help?
Yes, I think so. I think that, as you said, the work starts at home. The work starts at your own airline, and if anything, and I mentioned that earlier, this is no longer about digitalization as a technology or an IT problem. It's a business problem, and so you're absolutely right that the claims management has to be on the agenda of the airline, but also on the agenda of the industry. And fortunately, we have standards around claims and loss prevention, and it all starts there. If there's anything I've learned from doing this job for decades, to be honest, is that the more you can use standards in association with digital technologies, the easier it gets. Because if you don't use the same standard as humans, it's already quite hard to work together If you don't use the same standards with digital machines, it's almost impossible. So it starts with using common standards. Another area where I think Iata can really work together with the claims and loss prevention world is to do it together. One of the things I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned it as well, we use freight tracking devices and things like that. This is not something that was developed in isolation by Iata or in isolation by an airline. It's actually a corporation. And so when it comes to claims and loss prevention, the business expertise is with the people in this audience. It's not with the digital people like myself. And so it's not unless you work together that this can work. And therefore, it would be really great if one of the outcomes of this meeting here would be that there are some parties saying, listen, I think this sounds interesting. Let's dig deeper. Let's make this work. Let's set up a small group of people to see if, for example, we could use one record for the purpose of improving the claims and loss prevention process along the lines that you have very skillfully sketched out earlier on. Then there's also a business case. And funnily enough, often that's the hard one. For example, how do you prove that if you make a booking digitally that it's more efficient than the alternative way, and how much money is it going to generate? This is a hard one. Funnily enough, I think in claims and loss prevention, the business case is far easier to explain because you know exactly what losses you're talking about and what claims. You can see the impact of improvements in the process, which can be tracked if we use data. So it's something that needs to happen, but I think that we can do that again if we work together. Another thing, and I'm assuming that there are also not just airlines and associated parties on this conference, but also solution providers. There's some opportunities here, right? Like you said, Clara, you don't have to do it yourself. You can go out externally as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot airlines can do. There's a lot that the industry can do together with Iata. And overall, I think the time is now. The time wasn't 5 years ago, but the time is absolutely now. So with that, Clara, I don't know if you have any final thoughts on our discussion.
Yes, I totally agree with you. The time is now. Yeah, we have been doing pilot projects in the last few years, and right now I'm so happy that we have the Iata Run Record stuff go live. And I really want to tell our customers and everybody here that actually One Record is not something about rocket science. Yeah, we can really put it into our production environment. Yeah, so I would like to ask everybody, please come and join us to work together and to support the new standard.
Thank you very much, Clara. Thank you also for this really interesting discussion. And with that, I would like to turn it back to Christian.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hank. Thank you, Clara. I think that was exactly what we were looking for, this overarching view of what claims management can do in terms of digitalization. And I think you're raising a very interesting challenge to the industry, to airlines, but also, as you said, to solution providers in the environment of claims prevention and claims management and loss prevention. There is certainly opportunities there to seize, and as you said, the time is now. So it's good to hear that this webinar is very timely. That's actually a nice segue into the next session, which will look more closely at what digitalization means for claims management and loss prevention with a concrete example. For this panel, we have representatives from 2 airlines, Air Canada and American Airlines, and Tom Sohoral, is the Air Canada manager for cargo solution strategy and business development. He will demonstrate how this airline has adopted digitalization and how this adoption can impact claims management and loss prevention. Then Sebastian Cosgrove and Kelly Shove will join the discussion. Kelly is American Cargo Managers of Claims and Customer Care, and the title says it well, actually. Her role is to focus on improving processes and technology to help ensure the best customer experience possible. And Sebastian is Air Canada Cargo's Manager for Customer Service. So he also, his role is to ensure that the customer experience is at its best. So Tom, we'll start with you. We'll look forward to hearing what you have to say on digitalization at Air Canada. I believe you have a presentation, so we can go through this presentation and then have the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, Christian. It's a pleasure to be here again. So thank you so much for having me. And my presentation is brief and succinct, so I will jump right into it. Tom Sorab, Manager of Cargo Solutions and Business Development. Today, I'm going to be presenting one of my passions, which is the integration of IoT technology into the world of air cargo. I think this the presentation will read much like a picture book. It's very succinct, but one thing that comes to the forefront of a lot of our customers is when they see damaged cargo. I think they think of the first scene of Ace Ventura from our fellow Torontonian Jim Carrey. What he does is completely violate a box en route to delivering it to the customer. When our claims come in, that's the vision that a lot of the customers do come through. I'm sure that that's the way that they've described it to you as well when they process these claims. Some of the things that we don't know is, like, what happened to the cargo? How did it get to this condition? How did it get to this location? And there's a lot of questions that are asked that we don't have the answers to. And we, as Tim said in the very beginning, with one of his examples, prove that this damage happened with us, and the answer is no. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about how digitalization is personifying cargo. Next slide, please. So in this slide, what I want to talk about is let me start with a statement. The statement is, if you don't care about quality, you clearly don't care about your customer. This is a bad transactional relationship, and it will not last. One of the reasons why we've invested into the CEIV programs with Iata is because we wanted to improve our quality, and we wanted to show that quality and have that commitment to improving our quality year over year, not just improve the quality once and move on. So with this, there's three elements to this program: the ULDs, the cargo facilities, and the aircrafts. These are the three places where cargo resides when it's in our custody. And it's important for us to know what happened while it got to these locations and while it was being transferred from and to these elements as well. If I can move on to the next slide. So within the ULDs, these are, if I can say it very bluntly, dumb pieces of metal. Uniload decided to partner with a company called On Asset Technologies based in Dallas to integrate their Bluetooth trackers into their assets, so pallets and ULDs. This has given Uniload the ability to make these dumb pieces of metal smart. When I mean smart, I do mean IoT smart. They're able to track the allocations, the dwell times, the temperature, light, humidity, impact, and pressure. These data elements are being collected for a larger picture, which I will explain during my one record portion of this presentation. Next slide, please. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the major cargo hubs for Air Canada are Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. These three buildings are temperature mapped with the identical Bluetooth sensors from On Asset. So I can tell you what the temperature is of the entire building any day of the year, any moment, at any time for the past 365 days. I can tell you what areas would be safe in the month of July, what areas would be unsafe in the month of February. I can tell you what the conditions are of the coolers, how it's been maintained, and also when the maintenance had happened, so the coolers were out of spec, and what their contingency plans were with these sensors. Next slide, please. This one is one of the more exciting ones because this is tracking the temperature conditions of our cargo within our fleet while it's in the air. A lot of what happens is our customers don't know what has happened to the cargo while it was in the aircraft. It's easy to track the conditions of a building or track the conditions of a ULD, but to track the conditions of cargo or the actual conditions of the aircraft while in flight, that's extremely difficult. So what we've been able to do is, once again, partner with On Asset Technologies to integrate their equipment into our aircraft. You can imagine how difficult it is to put a tracker onto a piece of cargo. All the logistics and all the FAA circulatories you have to understand to allow this to happen. We've been able to understand and figure out a way to integrate this into our aircraft so we can track the temperatures of the aircraft, track that the conditions are okay, and then also receive that information in real time. So that means that within 15 minutes of occurring. The data takes 15 minutes to process on the cloud. However, we're able to have a message back to the pilot to advise them that the conditions of the cargo hold are incorrect and that can be adjusted once we have that program entirely into play. Next slide, please. This is a little animation. If you click one more time. Okay, the animation didn't work, but that's fine. This is just a quick snapshot or a collage of some of the sensors that have been installed in the past few weeks. To date, as of yesterday, there are 261 Air Canada aircraft that have Bluetooth sensors installed into the aircraft. This has been a project that's been ramping up very quickly. We intend to have our entire fleet before the winter season really begins or the first snowfall happens. So we are aggressively working towards these timelines of getting the entire fleet Bluetooth equipped so that we can prevent the aircrafts from not only freezing when they're on the ground, but also tracking the cargo conditions when they're in the air. Next slide, please. So I talked about the ULD digitalization, I talked about the facility digitalization, and I talked about the aircraft digitalization. What I want to talk about now is the one record component of this digitalization program. If you can click further, one more click, just get the animation, which I assume is not going to work. Okay, click again, please, until we get to the last part of the slide. I apologize. So right now we have these cargo IQ milestones, which I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. And these cargo IQ milestones are very binary, 0, 1, yes or no. Did it happen? Did it not happen? And if it didn't happen, it's considered a failure for the entire cargo IQ milestone or cargo IQ program. I'm not a big fan of this because it's very binary. With the ability to digitalize this, next slide, please. One more. One more click, please. There we go, perfect. So by digitalizing all of these milestones, instead of receiving binary information of what happened, we can receive object-oriented information of these milestones. So what happens to the ULD? Where was it located? What was it impacted? When did the cargo enter the ULD? What happened to the cargo piece? Did the cargo piece feel the conditions of the ambient temperatures, so on and so forth? Was the cargo left out in the sun? Was it left out in the rain? These sensors will be able to detect this information as well. So by taking these binary elements and making it object-oriented with multiple elements built nested inside, I can describe the next slide, please. One more click, please. So the cargo piece would have multiple elements, and it would have these the DIMMs, the commodity, and other components of that cargo piece. The cargo piece fits within the airway bill, which also has the house airway bill details and all the other information, origin, destination, so on and so forth. Then we have the timestamps of the facility, what happened at the GHA or at the cargo hub location. We also have the ULD elements as well. And the last part is the aircraft. What happened within the aircraft? What position in the aircraft was it? What were the aircraft temperature conditions or even impact conditions loading to and from the aircraft? When we merge all this together, all these data elements and all these objects are an object within a larger object within would be in the one record program. So if you have the information and you have access to the data, you'll be able to extract specific elements for your claims process to understand what happened, how it happened, and that's the reporting process. Eventually, this data would be used towards predictive analysis to understand what will happen to the cargo before we've even received it. By collecting this information, we can build out an AI model of when would be the best time to actually handle our cargo. I know I condensed 3 presentations into 1 presentation, but I hope this really resonated with you. And if not, I will hand it off to my colleague, Sebastian Cosgrove, who will be able to articulate this in a more customer-centric point of view. Sebastian, I'm going to hand this over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So Lucy, next slide, please. We've talked a lot today about the digitization and and the claims process and what can come out of that. But what we haven't really touched on, and Tim did in his initial presentation, was loss prevention. And I'd like to take a step back from the aerospace industry and actually talk about retail stores. So conventional retail stores have always had a focus on loss prevention. From the physical tags that you often see on garments through to RFID tags sewn into new jackets, and into surveillance and visual recognition and loss prevention officers. The retail space has continued to update their loss prevention efforts to mitigate their costs. On electronic equipment, companies such as Apple and Fitbit can also track and monitor their devices and know exactly when they were received by the customer, when were they activated them, who activated them, and where the devices currently reside. So the slide in front of you actually highlights the physical evolution from physical security with those tags on your garments and video cameras in the stores to data intelligence with RFID, GPS, and analytics up until today, where the retail space is currently using visual intelligence, so machine learning and AI, shopper engagement, for example, Amazon running stores without any physical staff, and facial recognition. Apple currently uses this today. As you scan your device using your face or Face ID, it gives you the power to make purchases directly from your phone without the risk of hacking or accidental purchases. Apple makes the user select the type of payment, confirm the payment, and then will immediately charge you, all done through just looking at the front of your phone. Next slide, please, Lucy. So the question is, how has loss prevention in the air cargo space evolved? So our freight is very different than the retail industry. We're subject to rain, snow, extreme heat, and cold. And we also rely on multiple stakeholders throughout the entire process to make sure that the goods reach their destination in good order. We're reliant on the packaging, on the first leg trucking, on the build and breakdown at our cargo warehouses, on customs inspections and doing their job properly and with care and class. And we're also dependent on that final mile delivery run if you're talking about e-commerce or small packages where the customer's paid to have it delivered to their door. All of these elements combined make pinpointing the root cause of any claim extremely difficult and potentially time-consuming. Often when a claim is submitted, the investigation can take a prolonged period of time while the claims team waits for details from operations, customer service, and often the customers themselves and the documents that they need to submit. As more time passes from the initial incident, it becomes increasingly harder to determine what actually transpired and how could it have been prevented in the future. Next slide, please. As Tomal discussed in the one record or the layered Russian doll model, we're taking this model by leveraging one record to combine all of the necessary information into a single point of truth. So by combining all of the known elements of the waybill, such as the DIMs, the pieces, the weight, the physical elements, such as how did the waybill move, what are the aircraft types, what are the ULDs, and the facility features, we should be able to expedite the handling and the processing of claims. Even starting small with one doll will help us streamline that entire claims process and start identifying root causes. But by linking all of the elements together, we can also start to proactively flag inconsistencies to our operational teams, such as aircraft temperature configurations or ULDs that may be exposed for a prolonged period of time while containing perishables or temperature-sensitive freight. By linking all of the one record or Russian dolls together, internally, we can create this single record for all parties to track the movement of freight from its acceptance through to delivery, down to the minute details such as temperature, exposure, location, and handling. Next slide, please, Lucy. But I'm also not naive enough to know that one record is coming tomorrow. It's going to take quite some time and it won't happen overnight. So while one record is focused on the operational side and linking together all those data points, we also have to be cognizant of a common complaint that we hear year after year in the claims industry is what was the customer told when they were booking their shipment? Were they guaranteed delivery in a certain time frame? Did we promise cooler capabilities on a shipment that wouldn't normally qualify? Understanding what the customer was told is a critical component of the customer experience and ultimately the claims journey. I'm sure many of the people listening today to this webinar can relate to the statement, but the representative told me, I asked for temperature handling, I was guaranteed it would move as booked. Short of listening to the phone call, provided you can find it, oftentimes claims cannot proceed and it becomes a he said, she said situation. To this end, at least at Air Canada Cargo, we're looking at integrating sales and service into a single pane of glass. So agents will be able to see what sales quoted, what they told a customer, and continue with the booking while making notes. All calls will actually be transcribed and applied to that waybill file. So if there ever was an escalation or a claim, the claims manager could go in and see exactly what the customer was told, what they were quoted, and what the customer actually asked for. This connected experience, by leveraging all groups together, customer service and sales, will give us a unique opportunity to truly see a customer by capturing all of their essential data and touch points. In turn, this will lead to better operational handling and ultimately an improved claims experience. By reducing the claims investigation timelines and providing one record to claims, both operational and customer service, we should be able to integrate claims into the entire process instead of having them work in a silo. So the diagram that you're seeing right now presents these highlights in a very simplistic fashion about how claims cannot operate in a silo, but as a part of the overall customer experience. Each aspect of this experience is interconnected, so no one group can work in isolation, else risking the successful movement of the cargo goods. Next slide, please, Lucy. So how are we focusing on loss prevention? While these new systems are being deployed, we're taking a very traditional approach. So we're using newsletters, digital posters, weekly updates to the various teams involved. Customer service now reports on a quarterly basis the claim details in aggregate and focuses on how we can reduce those claims. To give you a tangible example, this past summer, the summer of 2021, we had an inoperative cooler at our global hub, and this was identified by the operations team. We subsequently saw through the claims reporting an increase in temperature spike in temperature deviation claims and our CAPA requests. To mitigate this and to improve the overall customer experience, we worked with our operational colleagues and customs to find an interim solution until the cooler could be fixed. Once the interim solution was put into place, we saw claims stabilize, we saw CAPA requests come down, and we were able to actually track root cause of where a lot of these failures were happening, all through that connected experience and improving the communication between the various groups. We've also subsequently started to report claims on a weekly basis to the various station managers, and it highlights claims month to date, the total amount claimed by customers, and then how much we've actually paid. So we break it down by top product, a year-over-year comparison. And as you'll see on your screen, underneath the X's are there, it's just high-level figures, but we break it down for the station managers into lessons learned. So these manual reports will be transitioned to automated reports, but at least in the interim, we're focusing on a single system, a communication between both operations, claims, and customer service, and sales to complete that overall customer experience to focus on loss prevention. Next slide, please. So by connecting all internal stakeholders from the booking through to the shipment movement through to claims, we can hopefully reduce the cost of investigating the claims, find a resolution for our customers, and create that single pane of glass or source of truth. Ultimately, as I've said, from booking to delivery and investigations, cargo departments can no longer work in isolation or in silos to address claims. Then the focus needs to shift, like in the retail space, to prevention. And having the digitization will allow us to do that, but in the interim, we have resorted to manual processes, which will hopefully allow us to drive down some of our claims and integrate into a more connected customer experience. So that concludes my part of the presentation, but we also have Kelly from American Airlines with us today, and we've received a few audience questions. So we'll actually flip over to Kelly now to answer the first one, which is, Kelly, please tell us about the claims experience at American Airlines. Is the airline taking a similar approach like Air Canada to integrate claims? And if so, can you please describe the change efforts?
Hi, thanks, Sebastian. Yes, we're taking several steps to modernize our claims process. We've recently switched to a 100% online claim submission process, which allows us to track our incoming claims better. We've also launched a new end-to-end claims tool that puts all steps of the claims processing process into one system. This allows us to automate documentation, track status, update customers, and just generally be much more efficient. We are taking steps to be more proactive internally as well to help prevent the claims before they ever come in. For example, what trends do we notice during claims processing that if we let our field operations know, they can make adjustments in the future to prevent a similar claim from ever being submitted? It can be very simple things. Maybe we've gotten several claims regarding water damage in a station. Well, let's reach out to that station and let them know that maybe they have a leak somewhere. With so much transition lately and so many folks doing new roles, it's easy to understand why staying on top of things like these is just so important. So we're trying to work together with our other cargo teams to improve our technological foundation with the intent of course, improving the customer experience and then reducing the number of claims. It's really a joint effort.
It's interesting you say that you have people in new roles. I think most of the people attending today at airlines would say the same thing, that that transition from a senior experienced workforce to potentially a very junior workforce may have caused an increase in claims. Have you found that the claims team is working with, let's say, training and recruitment to try to address maybe that gap of skills and knowledge?
I would say at this moment in time, that is a goal of ours. We are working more internally within the claims team and with the stations directly, but would love to get to that point where we're more integrated with the training team as well.
We're in the same boat, Kelly, so you're not alone on that front. We had one more question that came in specific to American Airlines, and that is, there's often a disconnect between what the customer was told or sold and how the claim is handled. How is American addressing this disconnect?
This is actually very timely for us. As I mentioned, we recently implemented a new cargo management system. And along with our COVID-related reorg, there are a high number of people doing new roles. And even the people whose roles didn't change, well, they have a new tool to contend with. So we do see instances where maybe not all of our internal folks are aware of claims new processes, or where customers are told about maybe the older way that we did things. So some of the things that we're doing about that are low tech. You know, we're joining some of the sales calls to share the new ways that claims work so they can tell our customers. We're meeting with our stations, kind of as you mentioned, and sharing the types of things that we're hearing. Some are more involved and involve technology improvements. We are updating our .com presence to make it clearer to customers what their expectations should be and what they can expect along the way. And we're working on things like bots to help improve our processing time and efficiency internally, kind of on the back end. So we're working on it from both ends, and hopefully we can kind of be in the middle there.
It sounds very similar in that by focusing on improving the overall customer experience, you're trying to focus on loss prevention instead of being reactive and just claims handling. Would that be a fair summary?
Absolutely, definitely.
And Kelly, one more question from my perspective. Have you integrated any automation into your claims handling? I know you've referenced the new system. Is it still manually processed on the back end, or are you working with bots to try to scan through some claims to identify easy wins, if you will?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It is still overall a manual process from the perspective of processing the claims and doing the research and finding out kind of exactly what happened in that particular instance. At the same time, our new cargo management kind of tool allows us to have better access to some of the data or the information that allows us to do that research. So we have some of the documentation available to us at the, at a click versus having to reach out to the station. And then we are working on bots. We've implemented a handful already, and have a whole list of ones that we would like to see coming down the pipeline. So it's definitely kind of a mixture. Still manual in some areas, but we're really striving to get to that more automated way of doing.
Perfect. It seems like, from what I've heard, many of us are in that boat of having a hybrid solution in the interim while we work towards digitization. Christian and Lucy, I recognize we're almost out of time on this panel, but I'd like to open it up to any audience questions. I'm just not sure how to see them. So if you can help us at this point, that would be appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. I mean, we have a remark. It's not really a question, but there is this remark that understanding that the carrier is at the mercy of the freight forwarder for packaging, and we accept freight under the assumption sufficient packaging is used, how can we ever truly be focused on loss prevention? There are too many unknowns in our industry. So it's more an affirmation, but maybe you've got some reaction to that.
So Kelly, would you like to tackle this one first?
Well, sure. I will say that we see this regularly. Of course, we refer to our contract of carriage, which states the freight must be packaged properly, and we don't pay out in certain circumstances where it's not packaged properly. But we're working on an internal kind of push to document any packaging deficiencies in that end-to-end system that I mentioned. That way, if there is a claim that's received down the line, the claims team can see that information and use it to make payment decisions. We want to make sure that we're using our new technology and getting in the habit of documenting things as much as possible. But I'm sure there are ways that we can be even more proactive and work maybe with our customers to encourage them to use appropriate packaging.
From an Air Canada side, and Tom, I invite you to jump in as well from your business development perspective. We're doing the exact same approach as you, Kelly, at American. So encouraging the staff to document the waybills if they notice anything, to refuse that freight if it doesn't meet the IATA requirements and the guides. And to help them with that, we're trying to empower those frontline staff. So giving them the tools that they need to make informed decisions, making sure that the IATA manuals are readily available and accessible, as well as supporting them when they make those decisions. All too often we hear, I'm going to accept it because I don't want to hear from management after that we lost the revenue on this. So we're trying to really coach both frontline managers and frontline staff on the implications of accepting freight with subpar packaging. Tom, I don't know if you have anything to add. No. Christian, any other questions for us today?
Yeah, I'm just coming off of mute. Yeah, one of the things.
Tom, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm a little bit. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, the quality of the connection is not very good. Let's give it a last try. I'll remove my video again.
Tom, do you want to try one more time? Hearing nothing. Christian, we'll go back to you.
I'm conscious of time.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, the quality is not good, Tom. I'm sorry, we have to move forward. But I think the point was clear on
last time. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Tom, I think the connection's too poor, so we're going to jump.
So we'll move forward, and yeah, because we still have.
I apologize. There's a lag on my side. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, Tom, I think we'll give up on this, and we'll move forward. So I think you emphasized the importance, especially in this last part on education, and of course breaking up silos, and that's essential to enhance the customer's experience. They deal with one airline; they don't want to deal with the sales on one side, the claims managers on the other side. So digitalization can really help in putting this together. As we saw these dots actually building up, it's the same internally. So that's good, but of course, when we talk about claims, there is still litigation, and we have also to cover that aspect. So we'll move to the next panel now. Thank you again, Sebastian and Kelly and Tom, and Tom. Sorry that we couldn't hear your answer on the last question. But if we move forward now, so yeah, we don't like litigation, except maybe the lawyers who are on the call, but otherwise we want to avoid this. But nevertheless, we need to tackle this issue as well in terms of digitalization. And now that we've seen how we can best enhance the customer's experience, we need to look at the legal instruments in terms of a claims issue and whether these instruments are fit for purpose, or does the law actually need to change. And for this, I've gathered a panel again of top experts in their field. The way we will structure the discussion for the rest of this webinar is as follows. We will first hear the panel of experts providing their views on how digitalization may impact the current legislative framework. If we have time after that discussion, we'll try to address one or two questions from the chat box. And after that, the same experts will use a presentation to provide the claims manager's guide. The objective here is to provide a useful takeaway for this audience, a takeaway that we'll also make available after the audience. And the person who will moderate this panel is Dan Sofin. And Dan is a well-known attorney practicing in the UK and the US. He's also a lecturer and a passionate actor in digitalization. As you can see in his biography that is available on the website, Dan has even provided his advice and oversight for the design and implementation of a digital claims management process for a global air carrier. So really, he's the right person to manage this panel. He's also been a tremendous help in setting up this webinar. So Dan, this is also my occasion to publicly thank you for the passion you've put in helping us putting this webinar together. And now I will let you introduce the panel. But what I suggest is that for the rest of the session, you all turn the panelists, Lucy, George, Bart, and then you all keep your video on until the end. So we start with the panel, we have the questions, and we have the guide with you all present on the device, on the screen, so that you can react as appropriate. Dan, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Can we have our panelists on? Great. One more to go. Great, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Clara and Hank gave a fantastic presentation, as did Sebastian and Tom and Kelly. The topics that they cover go very neatly in parallel with a lot of the legal issues that may evolve in this discussion. And of course, I think the four of us, we find ourselves often asked by claims managers and risk managers everyone gets it in the operation, but they all want to know what the heck is happening on the legal side. So today we're going to discuss how digital and transport law is or may be evolving, and the potential legal issues that claims managers may face as claims handling and management becomes increasingly digitally and AI based. So we want to provide you with a window on the issues that claims managers and lawyers can expect to see as the cargo supply chain logistics become progressively more multimodal and digitally linked. Hank and Clara discussed a bit of that earlier. And we also want to offer a general view on how claims management and loss prevention will also evolve and function in this new digital world. Now, we really do have a blue chip panel of internationally recognized legal experts who are known around the world for their contributions to aviation and transport, and really especially for their thought leadership in this very challenging industry. Always a privilege to work with them, and I do work with them, love it every minute. And it's a pleasure to have them for our discussion today. When it comes to aviation, if they don't know it, it's not worth knowing. As Christian said, their bios are on the website, but I do want to mention in particular that Lucy England has a deep experience and expertise with digital technology, its applications, and its evolving regulation. She's a much sought after advisory resource for the aviation and travel industries. Bart is managing partner in the New York office of Condon and Forsyth. They are known globally for generations as one of the most elite boutique specialized aviation firms. Bart focuses primarily on representing air carriers in both litigation and commercial matters, and he's got a special expertise in major aviation catastrophe, contracts, regulatory enforcement, and most importantly for today, air cargo. George's aviation pedigree and experience is equally blue chip. He's got his 2 LLM degrees, commercial law and air and space law, and a PhD to boot from Cambridge. He's a qualified solicitor, having specialized in aviation law and served as assistant to the legal counsel at the International Union of Aviation Insurers. He's currently associate professor of law at the Institute of International Shipping and Trade Law in Swansea, and he writes often and deeply about digitalization and where the industry is going. So with that introduction, let's just dive right in. Lucy, may I ask you the first question? Having heard about digital and technical possibilities and applications of data and claims management and the air cargo operation from Hank and Clara and Kelly and Tom and Sebastian, what do you see as the critical legal issues that claims and risk managers need to come to grips with in order to organize and manage this rapidly digitalizing operation?
Thanks, Dan, and it's great to be here, everybody. Thank you for having me on Iata today. I think, yeah, when we're talking about legal issues with digitalization, often what we're talking about are legal issues with data. So what you heard from Henk and Clara were that, you know, digitalization generates data, and it's data that everybody wants, and that's what's going to help in claims management and loss prevention. And I think often the easiest way to look at data and the legal issues with it is to break it down into three categories. There's access to it, getting hold of the data in the first place. There's using it, how you handle it, how you process it, how you manage it when you've got hold of it. And then there's disclosure, so what you can and can't do with respect to sending it elsewhere or getting rid of it. And I think the overall theme with digitalization is that there's no overall regulation dealing with everything. You have to break it down in this way to look at the issues. So I'll take each of those three pots in turn, and I'll start with access. And I think the first question, what you'll see is that actually what you need to think about is just a bunch of questions that you need to ask yourself. And there is no one size fits all answer. As with everything legal, it's a very fact-based situation. So firstly, access. You know, what data is it you're actually talking about? You know, it might be weather fact patterns, it might be the condition of your cargo, that's more likely. I think the point here is that don't think that you're not dealing with personal data, perhaps. Everything sounds like it's operational data, but there might be, and don't ignore any personal data attributes. If you can identify a pilot, perhaps, or the employee of a ground handler in some of the data that you have by shift patterns, things like that, you may be dealing with personal data. So that's one thing just to bear in mind. The next thing is to think about who owns the data. Now, it's generally understood, I won't say every jurisdiction in the world, but many of them, that there's no data ownership at law. Data away from the hardware on which it sits, your computer, your laptop, your device, doesn't have a legal category because data is not seen as property on its own. So the question of data ownership is one that often gets talked about, but legally doesn't necessarily have a construct. So you have to think about other things, such as, is the data protected by any intellectual property rights? IP is hard to establish with data for lots of different reasons. You often need innovation, a database. You may not have a database. You might just have the ones and zeros that one of the earlier panelists talked about. There might not be any protection of that data itself. So if you do want to protect it and not give it away, you need to think about how you might do that. And then lastly, on the access point, you know, are you actually allowed to have this data? You've got it, but it depends where you've got that data from, and if you have one, what your contract says about whether you can have that data. And there will be different rights and obligations with that data depending on where it has come from. So that's access. Secondly, talking about use. And again, it's another bunch of questions to ask yourself, and it depends what the data is, where it's coming from, and again, what your contract says. I'm a contracts lawyer, so you'll hear me saying that a lot. But you know, do you have the right to use that data for what you want it for? It might be analysis and helping you with your claim. It might be actually in litigation. Do you have that right? You'll need to consider that. Do you need any guarantees about the quality of that data that you've been given? Depending on the source, you probably don't have that level of guarantee or warranty. And as Hank was talking about earlier, data sharing platforms, any platform that shares data is not going to stand behind it, otherwise they wouldn't share it. There'd be too much liability and risk on them. So something to consider when you're looking at what data you do have. If you have data and you generate new data from the data that you have, who owns, and I use that term loosely, the derived data that you've come up with, and what can you do with it? Again, there's no answer particularly, but something to think about if you have new data in your hands that you might need to use for your claims. And then lastly, can you reuse that data for a different purpose? So say you got hold of the data as part of the sales information from one department in your organization. Can that same data be used for litigation or analysis? Again, no particular answer, but it depends on where it comes from and what your contract says with it. And then lastly, just on this topic, just a few more questions to think about if you do want to share it. The transmission point, do you have the right to share that data within your organization? That is seen as transmission. Does data have a right of confidentiality over it, either from who you get it from and which you have to hold on to regardless of where you send it to? And again, this concept of derived data, if you've done some analysis with data for you to help in your claims, what are you allowed to do with that? Again, internally and externally for litigation. So that whistle-stop tour of what you need to think about. No answers, I'm afraid, but lots of things to think about.
Lucy, you're speaking primarily from I was going to say EU, including the UK.
Not anymore.
Do that anymore. From a European and a British perspective. Bart, Lucy has touched on them from that perspective. Do you have any thoughts from a US perspective?
Well, the U.S. data privacy laws are certainly less developed than Europe and the U.K., although they are developing. There's also the problem of the 50-state perspective, and that is different states have different regulations. So the U.S. is a little behind the U.S. and UK regulations as far as data privacy.
Do you think there's a possibility that the U.S. eventually is going to migrate towards a more European approach?
Yeah, I think eventually it'll be inevitable, and I say that because almost everybody on this line probably works for a multinational corporation that operates in countries all over the world, and as such a company, it's difficult to be able to toe the line and observe every country's different regulations, and that's why I think as difficult as it is to have, say, a convention on data privacy, I think that's certainly where we're headed, and I think companies want that to happen.
Thanks. George, we have operated for many years now in a logistical environment in which various modes of carriage have been integrated into the air cargo chain of carriage, especially with road carriage and increasingly now with first and last mile. Pandemic response has resulted in a huge increase in rail and sea carriage as an adjunct to air carriage, but being integrated with air carriage. And we've heard from Clara and Hank about that increasing integration. How does this add to an airline claims manager's role? And what will claims managers need to integrate into their roles to accommodate this expansion and evolution in the supply chain and the various modes?
Thank you, Dan, for the question, and thank you everyone for the invitation to be here. I think the pandemic was the facilitator of integration. I think for the first time in cargo history, we see so many steps towards integrating different modes of transport. And I think to some extent, one big part was played by the pandemic. On the other hand, some traditional carriers in a non-aviation markets want to compete with Amazon, and they see Amazon as a competitor, so they try to create or let's say invest in other modes. Maersk recently announced that they will be investing in air carriage and so on, which inevitably brings the market into this integration, not just for the customer's point of view and to satisfy the customer, whether you are an institutional customer or a consumer customer, but also for reasons of survival in the market. Now, the issue though with the legal points from an integration point of view is that there is no law to govern all modes of travel together. I mean, I think most of you as claim managers, you come across CMR, which is the International Convention dealing with carriage of goods by road. And I think once you apply CMR, you realize that sometimes it leaves more answers than it actually it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. So the problem is that aviation, we are a bit in a niche market, and the legal system is relatively tight. If you look into CMR, if you look into COTIF, which is the rail carriage, they follow a very old approach. Those conventions come or originate in the 60s and 70s. They are very detailed in the documents, in the limitation periods. Usually they allow full recovery if you prove willful misconduct and recklessness, which aviation has moved past that. But on the other hand, they are very cheap. I think CMR has only a 8.3 SDRs per kilo limit. If you go into the Hague-Visby Convention about sea carriage, has a 2 SDRs per kilo limit, which raises issues of recoveries and indemnity actions. If we work and we move into an integrated model and you have indemnity actions against them, and the question is how much you can recover eventually from them. Sea carriage will tell you I paid 2 SDRs per kilo, that's it, that's what you're getting, that's what my liability is. There are many legal regimes that do not have any more than 2-year limitation period. There's only 1-year limitation period, so you have to be quick. And in some countries, there's always the issue whether indemnity actions fall into the limitation periods of the conventions or not. Especially some continental European jurisdictions are famous for that, France, for example. And the last issue I want to mention, I think we already experienced that, is to what extent we apply Montreal and the aviation laws, or we apply any of the other conventions. The fact that you have issued an airway bill to cover the land carriage, whether it's road or rail, doesn't mean that Montreal Convention applies. Some courts will tell you, yes, it does, but many of them will tell you no. And then the question is, do we look into CMR? Maybe we do, but only for 50 states around the world. CMR has a very limited scope of application, which then brings us inevitably to a lot of local laws that even then, there is no unification whatsoever. So integration, I think, is very good from the customer's point of view. It is fueled by pandemic and certainly competition between modes of transport, but certainly does not come with a solid, unified legal framework. From a point of view of a claim manager, you have to look into different international laws that might be very different from the Montreal Convention, but also a lot of non-unified local laws in that respect.
So we have Lucy talking about a very big influx of new digital regimen. We've got the influx of multimodal transportation, which, although it's been there for a while, really is coming to the forefront as an integral way of carrying. Bart, it seems pretty clear against this background that claims managers and aviation lawyers are going to need to change their perspectives in terms of how they manage the overall claims management, loss prevention, and especially litigation worlds. From your point of view, what are some of the important changes on which to focus?
Yeah, well, yeah, combining both what Lucy and George said, you've got all these data issues that are out there. And as George pointed out, you've got this multimodal transportation with lots of participants. So really tying that together as a lawyer and a claims manager, you now have the problem of having this whole group being responsible for all this data. And really, it imposes a need to work together to share that data in response to the claims that are being made. And to Lucy's point, there needs to be protection of that data. And with all of your partners that you may have in this transportation, you need to be sure not just that you're protecting this data and using this data properly, but also that your partners in transportation are doing the same thing. It's going to require you to look at those relationships you have with the folks you work with to make sure that that's happening.
Are there going to be issues of protecting or disclosing data in the claims handling operation itself or in litigation?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to come up not only in responding to claims, but also in litigation, and that's going to come down very much to local law and court procedures, which we can touch on a little more when we start talking about litigation. But that's certainly an important piece to all of this.
So we've just had three mini topics at a very macro level, an environmental level and an industrial level. Let's focus for a moment on a more micro level to consider how these general issues are going to be integrated into more daily practice and planning and policy formulation. Lucy, from your perspective, what specific things can claims and risk managers do to accommodate and integrate this digital and data-based environment, and how can they contribute to the general cargo operation of the airline in their roles?
I think there's a few different ways, and it's not going to be one individual doing all of this, but yeah, if everybody starts thinking about these things as a collective, you can get there. I think the first thing is checking your contracts, your ground handling agreements, your services agreements, your A-way bills and your other intermodal contracts with your other suppliers to see if any of them do have data provisions that might help you, or looking at the access and the use side of data, whether those issues are covered. In my experience, a lot of contracts are silent on these things. So there is a natural evolution in moving into that. A lot of contract clauses which are there people think might cover these areas like confidentiality, say data protection we've mentioned, and IP, but they don't quite get there. So checking contracts to see whether there's work to do on those. And secondly, as much as you can, starting to amend your contracts, talk to your legal teams, talk to your contracts, your commercial departments to see what can be done to start addressing the issues of access, use, making sure you can get hold of the data you need or to protect the data that you have. I think thirdly, starting to look at your internal policies. Do you have a policy that deals with this sort of data access and data use point, or do you need to create a new one perhaps? And that should go hand in hand with the contract piece to make sure that they talk to each other and you can do what you need to. And then lastly, I think talking about your internal protocols and the tools that you have across your organization, not just within the claims management team, both internal and external. Again, so you can use what you can use data for and how it's currently used. Do you want to start measuring and improving your own internal operations? A lot of data can do that. Or are you going to use it for evaluating claims, or are you actually going to start looking at your service providers and using data to help with those relationships? So I think they're sort of quite big topics, but they're the areas which I think people can start thinking about and start making moves in.
Bart, from a nuts and bolts perspective of claims management and litigation, including the full spectrum of investigation, of assessment, management, handling, and resolution, how does this increasing digitalization and availability of data assist claims managers and lawyers? What should they be focusing on, and what do you think the issues are that will require changes in their current approach?
Yeah, if you were listening closely to the previous presentation and all the things that Air Canada and American Airlines have been doing to get data, it really opens up a lot of issues for claims managers to address, starting primarily with you're now more likely to know when and where the damage might have occurred. There's going to be a whole lot more data out there with these trackers and tracking, and no longer going to be this amorphous allegation that cargo was damaged at some point during the transportation due to something that might have happened on the tarmac somewhere. I mean, you really are going to have that kind of information. But not only are you going to have that information, but it's very likely that your claimants are going to have that information, either through your own tracking processes or just through the internet. And by that, I mean, your customers are going to know whether your flight was delayed. Your customers are going to, you know, they may have their own tracking devices. They're certainly going to have all the information at their fingertips to make their claim and to prove their case against you. So all of this data that's going to be both available to you and to your customers is certainly going to change the claims handling process. It's also, look, you also may have more information than you had before as to the condition of the cargo prior to acceptance. You know, if it's a particularly contentious claim, you may want to know whether that asparagus was spoiled before it even got to you, or whether those flowers were overheated before they got to you to transport. And you may be able to get that information because your customers may have that information. Claims handlers are also going to have to do, well, they're going to have to rethink that checklist of documents and information that they previously requested. Claims managers often have a little checklist on their desk of documents that they want to assess a claim. And that list should start including some of the more advanced data and tracking information that either customers or the airline itself has. That's certainly going to help to evaluate a claim and decide whether it's merited or not. So it's certainly an expansion of the type of information you're looking for and the kind of things that you're going to want your station to send you to help evaluate the claim. And then you're also going to have to start opening up those lines of communication with your partners, be it the trucking company, the ground handling agent, whoever it is that you work with to evaluate the claims, and find out what information they have. Certainly, there is much more data available, and the more data you have, the more accurate picture you can get as to what the transportation was like, what non-conformities were there, and where damage occurred. And all of that will be part of the claims handling process.
George, have you got any thoughts on this from your perspective?
I think I think Bart was very comprehensive, but I think the only issue I want to add is that to some extent, not just claim managers, but airlines, they need to be looking into more cybersecurity issues related to the cargo, in the sense that from the shipping sector, at least, we have experience with ports that the delivery of the goods were done on the basis of a electronic code, where essentially was given to the tracker, get into the port, got the container, off you go. And especially in Central Europe, we had examples where this code was hacked by certain gangs and the containers disappeared through no fault necessarily of the port, but through no fault of the tracker. But still, if something similar happens in an aviation context as the laws are currently, this theft would be still the airline would still be liable, although might not be in charge of the whole automated system of delivery. So in that sense, that raises the issue of cybersecurity and how do you safeguard yourself from a point of view of hacking into your systems when it comes to cargo that is to be delivered without any intervention from the port, from the airports, or even from you as a carrier. And the other thing I would like to mention parallel to that is that the current laws, at least the Montreal Convention and so on, they don't make any provision for that. A theft is a theft, and the usual victim is the usual target is the airline. From a point of view of cyber risks, to some extent, there is a discussion, or there should be a discussion, whether we allocate those risks again back to the airline in the traditional way of the carrier channels the liability, everything towards the carrier, or we involve other parties as well.
Do we lose anything in the process? The more digital we are, the fewer documents we have, and there are a number of documents in our business in which issues are written, whether it's a proof of delivery, for example, where a receiving consignee can deal with issues that he sees or she sees on receipt of the cargo. Are there issues that are now going to have to be addressed when we don't have written documentation?
Is that for me the question, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the general concept of any convention, whether it's a sea convention, a road, a rail, or aviation, is that they're not designed for the new world we currently face. They're not designed. They're designed on the basis of a paper documents. Even the Montreal Convention deals with the airway bills, electronic airway bills, and certainly opened up the whole idea of having electronic documents. But still, most of the notices, most of the issues about notification of other parties, notification of the carrier about potential damages, are all based on paper. And there is, at least in Europe, there is a case law developing slowly that we need to move more into electronic notifications, and electronic notifications would satisfy the requirements of Article 31 of Montreal and so on. But that's, again, it's a piecemeal evolution. Like some courts take the initiative and say, look, we're more advanced in data and electronic data, so we push the boundaries of the existing law. I believe I'm a huge supporter, like everyone else in this panel, of moving electronically, and I think it will facilitate customer care, plus also the carriers' way of working and cooperating among themselves. But at the same time, certainly the conventions behind these chains are not there. Apart from the electronic airway bill aspect, everything else is based on a paper documentary exchange of information.
Lucy
and Dan,
Mark,
I was going to say, George, I think George raises a very important point about the notice of claim issues that he mentions, because he's right. The convention certainly contemplates that piece of paper with the written notice of claim. And I think courts are going to have to confront that issue of electronic notifications. I think courts are generally accepting at the moment of email notifications. But what if you have a claims portal? What if a customer just has to check a box saying that there's something wrong with their cargo? Is that sufficient notice of claim? And I think as we move forward with these technologies, as George pointed out, we are getting into issues of what constitutes sufficient notice of claim. Does checking off a box in a claims portal, is that sufficient enough to give a carrier notice that it needs to investigate this claim? And I think these are certainly issues that courts are going to have to address, and frankly, the carriers are going to have to keep in mind. When you've set up a claims portal, you are going to have to set it up so that you are getting proper notice, that claims portal is properly staffed, so that you're not missing these notices that come in. All important points when you move on towards handling these claims and even litigation.
It is interesting that going back to 1975 with Montreal Additional Protocol 4 and the revision of the convention into the Montreal 99, when we have provision for electronic documentation for an airway bill, that no one addressed the Article 31 notice of complaint. And traditionally in all of our conferences for years and years, what is proper written notice of complaint is a fundamental key discussion point throughout. Lucy, George talked about cyber security and cyber threats and associated risks with that. Bart knows as well as anyone the amounts of money that can be involved in theft and or other unexplained loss of high value goods. Is there anything that can be done to manage the risk of these issues and events from your point of view?
I mean, I think sort of cyber security and data security is more of a technical issue than a legal one. I mean, from on this side of the Atlantic, the EU is legislating. You know, the floodgates have opened, and a couple of years ago there was the NIST directive, National Infrastructure Security Directive, which is now in force, and that applies to airports and ports and might catch some air carriers depending on their size, and that's just their obligations to make sure systems are in place and mitigations are in place for security of systems. But aside from that, which won't apply to everybody, I think security in itself is more of a technical issue. But obviously the consequences of a data breach, whether not necessarily, I'm not talking about personal data, but just theft of data, use of electronic devices, data is a legal issue, because if damage comes from it, then you're very much into the legal arena.
Well, it seems to me that surely the traditional role of a claims manager dealing with loss, damage, delay, or destruction of cargo is going to change if there, for example, is a failure in an airline system and claims are made for losses in other aspects of the carriage against the carrier, and by the same token, the carrier is often looking for indemnity and recovery for against from its service partners. So it is a timely issue, I think, but in a way it brings us back to the law, the applicable conventions and laws governing it. And I wonder, George, is the future of air cargo and the role of the Montreal and other unimodal conventions changing? What should we keep our eyes peeled for?
I think yes. I think it's always difficult to predict the future, but I believe that projects like the One Record and the the federated project, where essentially they are key elements behind this digital integration. I think the conventions are not in any shape or form related to them and are designed for them or ready to accommodate them in that respect. So my prediction for the future is that the more this type of projects succeed and the more they are being used worldwide, inevitably the national legislators will have to address them in one way or another, not necessarily from a digital point of view, from a point of view what Lucy would describe, and ownership and sharing of documents, but to what effect, to what extent the liability of the carrier is affected by the operation of those systems. So I don't think, of course, that will happen anytime soon, but from my point of view, any single unimodal convention is not yet designed for this new world. I don't think it will affect the developments. Usually law follows the developments, the operational developments. But I think at some point in the next maybe 5-10 years, some of these issues, they have to be addressed vis-a-vis, again, the liability of the carrier or the carriers in the supply chain.
It's interesting that when we look at the major unimodal conventions, we're looking at conventions that started in 1929 or the 40s and 50s, and they're still going in substantially the same form. We're in the 2020s right now, and technology has moved much faster than convention amendment. Christian, that concludes our micro and our macro discussion. Are there any questions from the audience?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, there are a few, and unfortunately we are really already running a bit out of time, but there is one which I think is quite broad and interesting to raise, because it will probably go to all panelists. It's actually a fear from the claims manager that their work may be replaced by digitalization and artificial intelligence. The question is, does digitalization and artificial intelligence ultimately have the potential to take over claims and risk management? What will the claims manager of the future looks like? And I think there needs to be here some reassurance what their future could look like. So it would be interesting to have the take of the panelists on this, I believe.
But why don't we have a quick lightning round and a sentence or two on your thoughts on that from each of us? Lucy, start with you. Oh, or
go ahead,
Bart.
Liz. No, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry, me. I think your job's safe. I think your role may change. Claims managers' roles will change. You know, technology has always helped us do our jobs better, but there is still a role for people. Yeah, they'll just AI, technology, data will just help us know more and do more. But you know, there's still a role for claims managers out there, definitely.
Yeah, no, I agree with Lucy, and I shudder at the thought of claims managers and lawyers disappearing, of course. But no, somebody still has to sift through all the data and make those decisions with regard to claims. But it's also you're also on the front lines, so to speak, on how to address those claims. And the question before about inadequate packaging. You should be encouraging your stations to take photos. You should be encouraging the loss prevention. And I think that's all going to be what the person is going to have to do and that the computer is going to have some difficulty doing.
George?
Yes, I agree with what Lucy and Bart said. And I think there will certainly be a need for a human claim manager to deal with the issues. But for the new generation, the people that are now thinking of coming up to become or to join an airline in the cargo side, certainly what we see at the university level, at least, is that we push our students to do so, is to become more digital savvy, digital proficient, if I use that word. We integrate more courses that are legal / IT, and the whole idea is not because technology will replace a lawyer or a claim manager, is that technology will require a claim manager or a lawyer to be more involved and understand how the new systems work, especially with AI, if anyone can understand at least, but to have some basic knowledge of this is how it works, and I can now use my legal expertise to deal with any relevant issues, but certainly not a replacement.
I agree with all three of you. I think the claims manager is going to become a key member of the organizational strategy team rather than being siloed. And this is something that Sebastian and Tom referred to earlier. I think the actual claim is going to end up being easier to resolve because of the availability of digital information. But the information that is obtained through the claims process really is going to put claims managers give them a strong tool to contribute. And that at the end of the day, it's going to affect customer experience. It's going to help enhance the operation, and it's really going to strengthen the cargo product, and that's something that Tim spoke about earlier in his introduction. Now, for the benefit of our attendees, we've prepared several slides to serve as a summary of the key points and issues that we've discussed, and also as something of a ready reference guide for claims managers highlighting those issues. Could we have the first slide with George? With your experience and everything you've spoken about, what are the key points that you have for claims managers?
I guess if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The more integration means that any claims person might come across laws that are outside his or her comfort zone, which usually is the Montreal Convention and the related aviation rules. You might come across the CMR, some of you or most of you probably have already, or even the CIM, the convention dealing with transportation by rail. Although I believe that because CMR and COTIF have very limited scope of countries that have ratified them around the world, around 50, most will end up with the local laws, like commercial laws, civil laws, common laws from each and every country where you are operating, that you will have to address them, and certainly they are not being unified. And I think the bottom line is that apart from expanding when it comes to digital operations, there will be also might require to expand a bit on the potential laws applicable to the hardcore contract of carriage, the railway bill, or any other documents we're using.
Next slide.
Yes, and then here, I don't think we have time enough, but I gave just a list of issues that how the Montreal Convention, the aviation conventions differ from the other modes of transport. So documents, they are more detailed. You need to have more information in your documents in other conventions. We are very comfortable in aviation having just the very basics, but in other conventions they have 10, 11, 12 particulars that need to be included. The defense are very different. For example, if you're dealing with a CMR, there is a force majeure defense. If you're dealing with sea carriers, if the master of the vessel screws up, the carrier has a defense. Doesn't really matter. That is his employees. And the liability limits, again, are very, very different in terms of how much money the other carriers are required to pay out to claim to the claimants. And if we can go to the last one, because I understand we are pressed for time. My bottom line is that the technology is there, is getting there. Like Henk said in his panel, that the technology is getting there. And the monitoring, like Bart said, is a double-edged sword. Airlines will have be able to provide better client care. They will be able to defend the claims better, whether it's inherent vice, a screw up of the customs or someone else outside its scope of influence. But at the same time, airlines operations will be more scrutinized either by freight forwarders or by the cargo interests themselves, which I don't think I think it's a quid pro quo we have to pay for the new world. But the bottom line is, from my point of view, is that data will become even more important now than witnesses or even expert assessors and accident assessors, because this is where all the information will be available, and to some extent for claim managers that might be a good idea, based on what other panels said, that you cut off the middleman. So you will not be requesting for documents, you will not be waiting for days or weeks to receive documents or to get access to the cargo loader. So the information might be more readily available to you to take decisions about any kind of complaints by your customers.
Thanks, George. Lucy, what are the key points that you think that claims managers and risk managers should bear in mind?
Okay, 10 seconds on each slide. These are the contracts that I think you need to start looking at, because I think a lot of them are silent on this sort of data and digital piece. Next slide, please. These are the areas in the contracts that you need to look at. If they're silent, start addressing them. I think you'll get all these slides, so I'm not going to read them out. And then the last slide, please. Things to think about when you're looking at getting hold of data. Where's it coming from? What contract provisions are there? What your internal policies are about it? And then how you're going to use it. Again, are there regulations on it? What do your contracts say? Can you analyze it? Should you be looking for more data from elsewhere? And can you use it for litigation? That's it.
And Bart?
I will try to be as succinct as Lucy. Yeah, no, these are all fairly straightforward issues. The one thing I do want to point out is your local laws and your local courts may have different regulations or laws regarding what needs to be disclosed, and it may run counter to the data privacy laws of the particular country you operate in, and you will have to confer with your lawyers on those sorts of issues. And then this is a slide that just talks about some of the articles that are affected, the articles of the Montreal Convention that are affected by digitization. And I think most of them are fairly straightforward. The jurisdiction one really depends on the local law of the country where the case is cited, and whether you can be pulled into a court in that particular country, just based upon where the airway bill was cut, even though airway bills are no longer actually drafted up in particular jurisdictions where an airline might have an office.
Can we go to the next slide? one of our big messages today, and we've heard it in previous presentations as well, is that the claims manager has a much greater role to play around the organization than their traditional role as just handling loss, damage, or delay claims. And we're talking about integrating claims management much more closely within the organization. Digitalized operations helps greatly in this effort. The slide that you see here gives what in digitalization, how it can improve the claims management function. If we look at our next slide, this is how digitalization can help in the risk management process. And in terms of the organization, which I think is the most important part here, Hank mentioned this in a little bit more detail. The claims manager does have a significant role in strategy setting in the organization. This notion of end-to-end visibility of the entire chain of the carriage is very important and will become increasingly more important. Next slide, please. But there is more benefit because we're not just talking about risk management and claims management in the organization. This goes back to Tim's discussion at the beginning of our conference. Customer service is going to benefit immensely from this. The operation is going to benefit immensely from claims managers' inputs into what is going on. They have vision throughout all of the carriage. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the product that the airline is selling is going to be enhanced by better integration of claims management into the organization. So I think that's the last slide. Oh no, we have one more slide. Sorry. Lucy, thanks. And that is actually what I've just said. End-to-end visibility, better contribution. It's going to have financial effects, excellence in product integrity, decreasing silo status, and really claims management has potential to be a much more important organizational resource. Thanks very much from all of us on this panel.
Thank you so much, Dan. And yeah, it's a record to go through 15 slides in 3 minutes. I apologize for this, but like we said, the slides are available, and this was a summary of what has been discussed anyway. So I mean, there was a lot of text there, but as we've seen, this is actually summarizing the outcome of this panel. So I hope that the participants will make best use of these presentations. And again, thank you for the panel to keep with time. I knew it was going to be challenging to cover in 2 hours a subject as vast as digitalization, but I hope that this webinar has contributed to show the evolutions that are taking place, and it's also somehow reassured the claims manager that digitalization is not a threat, but it's really an opportunity for them to seize and to be more integrated into the business of the airline instead of being siloed. Because this is what digitalization is all about, to break up these silos. So it's an opportunity to take. There is also a need to remain alert on the current changes. If the digital progresses are managed properly, they can lead to more efficient claims management and reduction of losses through improved risk management. So again, this is really the focus of today's message. In conclusion, some of you may know actually that the Director General of Iata is Irish, and that he loves to quote, especially Bernard Shaw, who is an Irish author. So I decided to do the same. Not that I want to imitate all the time the Director General, but in that case, I think that was appropriate to quote Bernard Shaw, because he has this quote which says that progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. And I think that's exactly the point. Digitalization, as I just said, is providing tremendous opportunities, and claims managers can really seize them to add value both operationally and financially to the airlines and also to the customers they serve. But for this, there needs to be some mindset change change of mindset, and hopefully this webinar is contributing to this as well. Lucy, can we have the last slide, please? Yeah, just of course want to end by thanking all the speakers who are willing to share their expert views about claims management and loss prevention in a digital world. Maybe by the end of that presentation, I'm able to say digital without stuttering on the word anymore. I would like also to thank Amerijet for their support for this event, as well as I said before, Dan Sofin for his passion is putting in helping to put this webinar up, because that's really helpful to have expert views on what is interesting for the claims managers. And finally, I would like also to thank my three colleagues that you haven't seen who are in the background. Lucy, not Lucy England, who was on the panel, but who has already been thanked as a speaker, but Lucy Excel and Nadia Belkebir, as well as Claire Mackenzie, who have been very helpful in the logistic for this webinar. So I hope to see most of this audience again face-to-face at a future cargo event. We were more than 200 people attending here, so it would be nice to have 200 people at a cargo claims and loss prevention conference in the future. But meanwhile, as I said, we will reach out to you anyway to send you the slides and the link to the webinar's recording. And I would like to thank you in the end, the audience, for your interest in this topic, for staying till the end, because most of you have stayed until the end. And stay safe, and see you soon at the Cargo Claims and Loss Prevention Conference. Thank you.